Kept you waiting, huh?
You asked for it, and now it's here. And trust me, more so than any other video I've ever made, people have asked for this. Here on YouTube, on my Twitter, and even on the chat on my live streams, you've made it loud and clear that this is something I needed to do. And that's awesome. Like, numbers are one thing, but for people to openly tell you that they are actively looking forward to your work is incredibly cool. But this isn't about me. It's about the latest trailer for Persona 5, and oh boy, this one is packed with delicious little details. But before any of that, I do have to address all the new information we've gotten since my original video, as well as why I'm jumping straight from Trailer 1 to Trailer 3. Also, if you haven't seen my original video, I highly suggest you do so now by clicking this annotation. I won't be going back over many of the things we discussed in that analysis here, so if you want to get caught up, that's how. And as always, potential spoiler alert. Anyways, without further ado, let's get started. First off, why did I not do an analysis of the second trailer? Well, the first red flag was how it wasn't posted on Atlus's official YouTube channel, and then I did some digging and found out why. That trailer is part of the special bonus Blu-ray that was given out with Japanese copies of Persona 4 Dancing All Night. It wasn't meant to be a public thing, and the Persona team was willing to use the copyright hammer on other channels to keep it that way. It's very telling when even the Shin Megami Tensei wiki doesn't provide a link to the video you're looking for, and because YouTube is basically my livelihood now, it's in my best interest to make sure I stay strike-free for as long as possible. Because of this, I will not be using any footage from that trailer in this video, so I apologize for that. It's unfortunately out of my hands. And now for some confirmations and corrections to my original analysis, starting with the main character. I was right about the Phantom being an outsider. Even the English website says that he had just moved to Tokyo before the events of this game. And now we even know what city this all takes place in too. Tokyo, and not Akihabara like I previously theorized. His relationship to Morgana is also more than I first surmised, as you can see her poking her head out of his bag in both this trailer and the first one. Big props to Denari Aiba for pointing that out to me. However, for reasons we'll touch on later, and please get used to that phrase now, I still don't believe he knows her from the start. There are other things that will correct over the course of this analysis as well, such as fighting personas and the overall story, but for now, the last thing I want to address is the identity of this mysterious individual from the first trailer. The observant may have noticed that he didn't look like any of the characters we'd seen in greater detail at that time, but now we know that he's the fifth playable character, Yusuke Kitagawa. And that name is pretty much all we know about him. But that didn't stop me from tearing even that apart to find out more information. Bear in mind that names actually mean things in other regions of the world. You don't just give one to your child because you think it sounds good. There is intent behind your title. Now that said, I can't find a consistent translation for the name Yusuke, but many of the sources I found referred to support or meditation. Even more interesting was a piece I found on a site called 7 Reflections, describing those with this name. It reads, and I quote, "You have a strong need for freedom. Physical, mental, and spiritual. You hate bondage in any form." Now, considering the themes of Persona 5, that is almost uncanny, so I'm willing to take that as my interpretation for now. We've also learned the appearance and official names for every single character's persona, including Yusuke's. The Phantom commands Arsene, Ryuji has Captain Kid, Anne is tied to Carmen, Yusuke wields the power of Goemon, and if you can't tell who Morgana's is by his appearance and choice of weapon, that Z he draws with his sword, yeah, big hint. Fun fact, Zoro actually means fox in Spanish. The name was used to refer to how Zoro was functionally a ninja, darting in and out of wherever he wanted with whatever he pleased before anyone could catch him. He's also seen as a force of good acting outside the law, as many of his actions are spurred by the oppressive Spanish government that ruled the greater California area in his time. In fact, all of the personas wielded by these 5 are famous historical thieves, or at least individuals of loose moral standards who are redeemed by their motivations, a theme that will become more important later on in the analysis. Captain Kidd is also known as William Kidd, who was either one of the most famous pirates of the 1600s or one of the most unjustly executed men in history. Scholars can't quite agree on that one. His was a career of tough moral quandaries and a tragic unwillingness to play politics, which eventually led to his death in 1701. Arsene's full name is Arsène Lupin, a character invented by French writer Maurice Leblanc. Lupin is a gentleman thief who intentionally targets people that are definitively worse villains than he is. Also, for those of you wondering, yes, Lupin III is canonically a direct descendant of this character. Now, Carmen is the odd one out in the group. If you haven't seen the play, she's a rather unsympathetic character when you get right down to it. She pressures her love interest to abandon his happy existence and step outside his normal comfort zone, only to act surprised when he doesn't find a life of debauchery as charming as she does. This pairing might have more to do with Anne on a personal level rather than a global one like the others, especially considering how similar they look, but regardless, Carmen was a gypsy and even lived in a smuggler's hideout. Finally, Ishikawa Goemon was the Japanese Robin Hood, taking large sums of money from the wealthy and giving it to those less fortunate. He's also famous for the way he was executed, as when the then shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu finally caught him, he was boiled alive. Yeesh. I bet you $5 when this game comes out that Yusuke will specialize in bufu skills. Alright, now that we finally have all that out of the way, we can start our usual process. We'll break down this trailer scene by scene and then wrap up all the info we've learned at the end into an overview. And before we begin, massive thanks must go out to Mystic Distance, who translated all of the captions and most of the text into English. I'll link to his video in the description, and please give him a big thank you for me, because now more than ever, understanding what's being said here is crucial to what's going on. The opening shot is our team of 5, yes, please note that 5 shadows pass by this opening, run by a window or passage of some sort. There's not much to say about this one other than that seeing the characters behind bars helps emphasize the imprisonment theme set by previous media. According to the dialogue, we know they're currently on a heist, and suggests they take a particularly valuable piece they encountered, but Yusuke tells her to come back for it later. This exchange implies that they're here for something much more crucial than valuables, and that the importance of completing that initial objective overrides even the prospect of significant material gain. This is very important, and something we'll be discussing in much greater detail later. Suddenly, Ryuji notices that wherever they are is shaking, and excitedly tells him to brush it off, but Morgana is more weary. I find this entire scene very cool because it displays all of their character traits in one dialogue exchange, and helps paint a much better picture of who these people are. Yusuke is stalwart, no nonsense, and maybe even a bit cold. He knows his job and he's gonna do it. Anne is fiery, impulsive, and energetic. She feeds off the adrenaline rush these heists give her, building on the colorful lust for life she displayed in the first trailer. Ryuji acts as a counterweight to Anne in a lot of ways, being just as loyal as any other teammate, but much more down to earth. He isn't necessarily the voice of reason, though. That job falls to Morgana, as she's the most experienced thief of the group and serves as the wise mentor figure for the rest of the team. There's more evidence of this being Morgana's lot in life later on, but for now, the debate between these 5 is cut short. The place starts falling apart, and now we see where they are, a massive pyramid in the middle of the desert. There even seems to be a stereotypical Egyptian city surrounding it at the base, which might have served as part of the dungeon leading up to this situation. Ryuji yells that they've fallen into a trap, and Anne desperately asks Morgana if the getaway car is ready to go. Morgana essentially tells her to keep her panties on, but Anne isn't having it. She literally hurls their feline companion ahead of them, presumably so she can make sure the car is ready when they get there. And cue the butt rock. The next couple shots are of the Phantom in his day clothes walking around the streets of Tokyo. And there's a lot of new information to digest here. First off, you may have noticed that the date in the corner changes now. It's not always stuck on April 11th like in the first trailer. Because of this, with a little editing magic, we can actually put all of these in chronological order, which we will after we've analyzed them all individually. Again, thanks to the translation, we know both where the Phantom is in these shots, as well as what's being said. He's visiting places like the Yongan-Jaya alleyway, the Yongan-Jaya underground metro, and the Shibuya Station Square. As he walks, we hear what's presumably a TV news report regarding an incident that happened in a metro station. An incident we can fairly safely assume has to do with this guy from the first trailer. People he walks by on the street even comment on the news, expressing concern and worry about all of the strange things happening around them. When the Phantom reaches school, you can even hear Ann and Ryuji chiming in on these events, and their insight provides some interesting keywords as you trudge through the second floor and courtyard of the Shujin Academy. But let's back this up for a second before we get to that. See these two in the red tracksuits? Unlike most other NPCs in the game and even your fellow students, they have facial features. This leads me to believe that they're important in some way, possibly relating to the social link system. Or at least that's what I would say if social links were still a thing in Persona 5. And this is another new piece of info we've gotten from Atlus since my original analysis. Turns out I was only half right when I theorized that social links no longer existed in this game. Technically they don't, but in their place is a new feature called the cooperation mechanic, which, and I'm using the exact words from the wiki on this one, will be similar to the social links of Persona 3 and Persona 4 and will involve building relationships with helpers around the city for various benefits in battle. And that's interesting to me, especially considering that this info comes from an interview in Famitsu magazine, where it was stated that, quote, details of this system will come at a later date. In this same interview, they were very quick to confirm other traditional elements, such as the state of randomly generated dungeons and the turn-based battle system. So if the fact that they need to refer to this mechanic by a totally different name isn't a big enough hint, the lack of willingness to drop info about it right away suggests that the cooperation system might be doing some drastically different things than what we're used to. And about that phrase, various benefits in battle, you mean aside from the bonus fusion experience you got before? Perhaps there are even more passive bonuses this time around, making the thief's greatest tool in this adventure surprisingly be a good network. And speaking of networking, that's one of the advantages to an RPG that's in a modern setting. Info travels quickly. Two people, possibly Ann and Ryuji, are debating on the nature of the incident, wondering if it's really possible to literally steal someone's heart. And turns out it is, but again, we're just gonna hold off on that little nugget for now, as it'll be more important and put into a larger context later. Instead, look at how the Phantom opens up his phone and starts getting texts from Ann and Ryuji. Note how at first, it seems like she's talking to Mr. Phantom, asking things like, how are you doing, and want to go grab a bite to eat or something, but then Ryuji chimes in a confirmation, meaning he got the messages as well. Ann could just be group texting her friends to see who's available, but the cell phone is giving me some very Tales of Symphonia vibes, in that you might be able to use it as a way of seeing optional little conversations between other characters, and give you some more insight into who they are. Atlus might even get clever with this system and use it as a way of alerting you to unique events around town on certain days that you may or may not choose to act on. But regardless of how intricate or not it is, things start to get complicated with these next few shots. Judging by their reactions, Ryuji and the Phantom are walking around the school grounds same as always when the building suddenly transforms into something completely different. Morgana informs us that this place is called Palace, and that it's a world given form from warped desires. Palace is the Tartarus of Persona 5, the dark, grim reflection to our own world, now emphasized by the fact that this version is only possible in places where a lot of bad karma has been built up. Back to our heroes, they're understandably confused by their change in environment, but out of options in terms of where to go. Because of this, the two enter the palace version of the school, but before we get to see how that went for them, we get a sudden cut to a train and blood starting to pool out from under a door. One woman notices this and rightfully panics. Thanks to another shot later on in the trailer, we even know who this blood belongs to, but again, we'll get back to that. Resolution to all of these is coming soon, I promise. We then immediately catch back up with the Phantom, who is looking much worse for wear. He's handcuffed to a chair, he's sweaty, bruised, and possibly tortured by his captors. And for what? Trespassing? Being the first human they've seen in these lands? Well, no, actually. According to the translation, this person is asking him how to steal hearts. Her voice also has a slight echo to it, implying that this being is unusual and possibly demonic in nature. But demonic or not, the Phantom's expression tells us everything, that he did not acquiesce to their inquiry. But never fear, Morgana's here, come to save the day by summoning her persona and protecting the two from whatever threatens them. It's worth noting that in this shot, the Phantom is in his thief gear and standing triumphantly. He's even radiating some form of energy. That is until Morgana gives him the motion to stand down and let her handle this. Ryuji even exclaims about Morgana being able to talk, further emphasizing that this is all new to him. This implies a very definitive chain of events, and don't worry, we'll go over that chain link by link during the overview. Also, you might start noticing a kaleidoscopic effect bordering the screen at times from now on. You might also notice that this only happens when the team is in Palace as opposed to the real world, so for the purpose of our analysis, what it does is help a lot when trying to pin down exactly where some of these events take place. The next shot is of the Phantom back in the real world and looking at his phone. It then gives him the command beginning navigation, after which we get a view of the screen ourselves and two icons. One is of an eye with a starry pupil and a harsh background. It certainly stands out, and the black accents help it pop even more, but let's not skim over the other details on this screen. Unfortunately, we don't have translations for that text hovering over the other icon, the one that looks like a stylized butterfly, and I've tried to figure out where this is in the world, but the layout and symbols here don't match any other glimpses of the mini-map we've gotten in this trailer, and there aren't any in the first one to go by. Our only clue as to where this is takes place in the text in the corner reading Studio Sigma. As far as my research can tell, that's not a real place in Japan, so maybe that's referring to a movie studio? We do see icons for a couple of those on the maps, and you know what? In fact, since we get our last view of the mini-map in the shot after this one, let's take a moment to analyze the view of the world these little black and white navigators give us. Starting with Yongenjaya Alleyway, this area is small, but packed with places to go. We see icons on this map for a movie theater, a general store, a coffee shop, and a medical clinic. Perhaps the very same clinic owned by Tai Takemi that we saw in the first trailer. There are two icons that leave me a bit lost though. The first is this one. It appears to be the Western symbol for recycling, which makes me think this might be a pawn shop where you can offload items you don't want and turn them into cash. Without a clear view of the building though, we can't be sure. Even more mysterious is this one, which appears to be a tied-up package, but as to what that implies in terms of gameplay, I have no idea. Frame by framing this shot, I did manage to catch a glimpse of both the staircase leading into this building and a sign above it, and at first I was hopeful I could brute force my way through this one because it was written in katakana. For those of you who don't know, katakana is not only simpler than most Japanese, but it's also mostly used for non-Japanese words, making it much easier to interpret. However, after much consultation, I came up with two words because I'm not quite sure what this symbol is. Either this is Kesso Tenku or Ketsu Tenku, which in order roughly translate to ink is extinguish and ink is missing. With a little bit of creative thinking, we can assume this has something to do with ink and erasing. And with that in mind, upon closer inspection, this symbol might actually be a stack of newspapers. So what does that make this place? A printing press for a local paper? Or just a place where you can buy the latest news? Bear in mind, part of this sign is obscured, so I don't have all the characters to work with. So for now, it seems that this place's true nature will remain a mystery. The other two icons on this minimap don't relate to buildings, but rather landmarks. The square ones show you the locations of vending machines. I can confirm this because we get a brief glimpse of one in a corresponding place in the world to the location of the icon on the map. And the other one looks like a camera? A photo booth, maybe? Huh. Perhaps your relationship to cooperation partners isn't that professional after all. The Shibuya Station Square has two icons, and I've got a fairly good idea what one of them is, that being the dartboard, which geographically matches up to this building. Looking at all the colorful signs and matching it up to the symbolism of the icon, this seems to be a game corner. We do see the Phantom playing a variety of mini-games later on in the trailer, possibly some of which are held inside this building, but, and say it with me this time, we'll cover that later. This one is an enigma, however. It looks like either a mortar or a telescope, neither of which I expected to find near a subway. We should be passing right by it in this part of the clip, but no matter where I look in what frame, I can't seem to catch a glimpse of this mystery attraction. Lay sigh. Better luck next trailer, I guess. There's not much to point out in the maps of the school. The first one just confirms where room 2D is located. The second, however, gives us a bit more to chew on, with a vending machine and two rooms with new icons, a bowl and a loaf of bread. The large room is most likely the cafeteria, and the smaller one is a dedicated bakery devoted to things like muffins or deli sandwiches. You may think that's silly, but my college had a similar setup, so it's not as far from the realm of possibility as you think. And finally, we return to this neon nightmare, which first confirms that this icon indeed stands for vending machines, considering we can make out all three of them from the map in matching locations in the world. There's also another movie theater here, which props for being realistic in terms of urban development, I guess, but again, I'm not quite sure how this serves the player. Maybe one is a budget theater and costs less than the other? That would make planning for dates a lot more strategic. But the three icons I'm really interested in are these, and I'll cover them from bottom to top. This one I believe to be an arcade machine, because if you look inside the entrance, you can see what appears to be a claw machine. I even have a name for this shop, as we get another view of the sign this time, and unlike our ink removal service in the alleyway, this katakana was actually pretty straightforward to translate. It simply says Furawa Rando, or Flowerland. Funny, considering the icon just north of this is an actual flower, and considering all I've got to go on when understanding what that is supposed to stand for is two women hanging around the entrance, yeah, you're on your own on that one. And then we have the martini. Not too much to figure out there, is there? But come on, this is the Shinjuku Entertainment District. Some of these shops proudly state that they're open 24 hours a day. There's a sign that reads Love and Cafe, and seriously, who here isn't a fan of the Yakuza franchise? Add that to the darker tones this game is taking, and I would not be surprised in the least if this bar featured women who would help you consume those drinks. And if not, check it out. This guy has facial features. Mark one more down for the list of cooperators. Cooperation partners. Yeah, it just doesn't have the same ring as Social Link, does it? Ring or not, we're being told by some voice that if we use this, we can go from the real world to the palace. Just like in the next shot, where the team is now hopping around the rooftop portion of the old castle dungeon. This probably refers to the mask every character wears, but as to the identity of the voice, I have no idea. It doesn't sound like any other character in the trailer, and I can confirm it's not our scene because of reasons. It doesn't even match up to Igor's Japanese voice, and you'd think if anybody, he would be the one to tell you this kind of thing. It's one of the most intriguing mysteries of this trailer to me, and I can't wait to discover who this person is. Another mysterious identity is this man in the next scene, who grabs the hand of a woman and drags her towards him. And judging by her expression afterwards, I think we can safely assume this wasn't part of her plans for the night. It's even accompanied by who I assume to be Yusuke talking about how this is a corrupt society full of corrupt adults, but also how you have the power to reform those people. I have my theories about who this man is, of course, but we have one more important shot to get to before it all starts to make sense. Not before another trip to the train, however, where we see the Phantom staring contemplatively out the window while Ryuji takes over narrator duties and states how he thinks all these people are being used. Oh, how the plot deepens. And so does the gameplay, because the next shot shows the team in another location in the palace, the entrance of the art gallery. Sneaking in requires a bit of finesse though, as the Phantom vaults himself onto a car, displaying more of the acrobatic platform elements we saw in the first trailer. Anne takes the mic for this shot, pledging her aid to the team with their mission to end the rule of these corrupted adults. Oh, and one more thing, amusingly, Morgana does not create the same rippling effect the humans do when she runs, instead creating a cartoony spinny leg effect. Flawless. Almost as flawless as hopping into paintings Super Mario 64 style and walking around the worlds inside. Another unknown voice takes the reins for this scene, commenting on how this must have been the work of those phantom thieves, the ones that steal hearts. To think it became a reality. Seems this bloke is an intermediary between the parties at work here, at least aware of a bigger picture than most normal people, but maybe not the full one like the woman who was pressing the Phantom for information earlier. And now for one of the biggest scenes in the trailer. Anne, Ryuji, and Yusuke all getting their personas. To help frame what's going on here, our deep voice guide from before is telling us that a persona is the self you show when you face those around you. It is the true self, the mask around your heart. To summon these personas, you'll notice that the characters first take on the eyes of a shadow. During this time, they are bound somehow, much like the Phantom was when he awakened to the power of Arsene. It's around this time that their mask forms, and by removing this mask, they are symbolically exposing their true self to the world, their persona. This act doesn't come without cost though, as you'll notice this is kind of a bloody and most likely painful process. But it also explains how the Phantom got the way he did at the end of the first trailer. You see now why I'm so anal about analyzing everything in these trailers? Even the way the Phantom's wounds were shaped was hiding an important detail. God, how are you so good at this, Atlus? And on that note, we don't even get all of the details about Ryuji and Yusuke's awakenings. Ryuji just jumps straight into having his, and while we see Yusuke get his mask and he is hunched over like something is holding him down, we don't see what. Quick note on Yusuke though, something I've noticed about him while writing this is how many traditional Japanese elements are woven into his character. His persona is Goemon, a legendary Japanese figure. His mask is a fox, a creature that features very heavily in Japanese mythology. When he first awakens his persona in this shot, he's surrounded by traditional Japanese paintings. He even shares a name with a famous Japanese woodblock artist, Kitagawa Utamaro. And what's he doing when we first saw him? Being an artist. This is worth note because tradition versus modernization is a struggle that's very deeply rooted in Japanese society, thanks in no small part to us rolling our navy up to their doorstep 200 years ago and yelling, "Rules of nature, bitch!" I juxtapose that to the narrative of Persona 5 and get the strong impression that Yusuke will be playing Yukiko's role this time around. And hey, check out the kinds of powers he displays when ripping off his mask for the first time. I'll take my $5 now. Now we're at the climax of the trailer, which means they start throwing a ton of action shots at you one after another, starting with a quick battle scene. The Phantom drops in, calling out for random fire, which is basically the command for your entire team to unload their clips and fire at will. We actually saw this ability in the first trailer, it just didn't have a name yet. Though we are getting some new info by confirming the presence of both Legion and Mott in this game as enemies. Then we're in a new area, and according to the translation, I kid you not, this is a space station. And the narrator is telling us not to think we'll get away from here safely. I want to know how we got here safely in the first place. But showing off the grandeur of the party is only half the spectacle. This world boasts some pretty freaky enemies too. Anne reassures us during all of these shots that these people aren't human, they're just demons filled with dark desires. Whether or not this line is taken from a point in game before or after she's aware of how on the nose this statement is unknown, but these demons nonetheless hold some cool design touches. Our first foe's domain is littered with money everywhere, and once he's done vomiting blood and growing wings, you can even make out a gigantic safe behind him. Let's call this guy Greed for now. And if he's greed, the next demon would most likely be vanity, a monster that rules the art gallery and reveres itself so much that it committed itself to its own frames for everyone to admire. But none of them hold a candle to the Freudian mess that is this thing. This is lust, and I want to freeze frame him right here so you can just take in all the little details of this symbolism. This is Cruella de Vil levels of something that is wrapped in refined and fashionable clothing, yet is ugly as sin at the same time. He has a crown, fantastic hair, a cape adorned with medals on the inside, a huge glass of wine, and even his eating utensils are solid gold. But that is a face only a mother could love, and that tongue just brings all kinds of uncomfortable thoughts to mind. Also, look at his surroundings. His room is held up by pillars of women's torsos, in their underwear no less. No head, no arms, no legs, just the part he's interested in. This thing even has a woman bouncing around in his glass like a straw. And look down at the base of his throne. Chained up and wearing heavy masks of imprisonment are 4 more women, just sitting quietly as the battle rages around them. Yeah, I don't know about you, but I feel very little remorse about what the Phantom Thieves are here to do to this guy. Even littler knowing that he fights back. By playing volleyball. Huh.
Nice spike!
Also, 2 quick things I noticed while editing. Take a look at the text on the volleyball itself. Sumiko is a general women's name in Japan, so we've got the objectification symbolism out of the way there, but keep that one in the back of your mind, because if there ends up being a character called that in the final game, this attack just became a lot more personal. Also, if you wanted to know just how powerful this guy is, it's only up for 1 frame, but we can see that this single attack reduced Morgana from 190 health down to 64. Ouch. Good to know the series' trademark difficulty isn't going away. Oh, by the way, want to know what my voice would have sounded like if this was recorded at a different time? Then we get 4 money shots of the main human cast, the first one being literal in that sense. The Phantom is in the vault room from before, with money slowly floating down from the sky all around him. However, instead of rejoicing and grabbing what they can, 3 separate people rush by him in a panic, from what we might have something of an idea. Also take notice, if you look at the details of the environment around you, it bears a striking resemblance to the space station from before, making me think that these 2 are the same areas. As for the rest of the team, Yusuke is standing around looking cool, Anne is in the room where we met Lust earlier about to set something on fire, and Ryuji is holding on for dear life in the desert, possibly because of the trap the team set off earlier. And then there's this section, where you're leading a group of mice on a stealth mission through the old castle area, specifically the 2nd floor of the East Tower. But these aren't just ordinary mice. They're all wearing masks, and if you'll notice, they're the same masks worn by the main party, and the main party status bars are still what's being shown in the corner. This suggests that this section might not just be a mini-game, but rather a small part of how the main game changes things up to keep dungeon crawls interesting. Was the team forcefully put in this state, or did they do it by choice to make hiding from guards easier? Well, easy so long as you don't walk straight into their line of sight, in which case they'll politely shine a spotlight down on you so the entire world can watch you run for your life. Fun times, that. And you know what makes it even more fun? Boulders. Nothing to talk about in the shot, so I'll just reference Indiana Jones. Although I guess Anne is missing. I wonder what happened to her. She'll be fine. Let me just cool off from all that running with some time in the batting cages. And you know, no day is complete without beating up on a Wing Chun dummy for a little bit. You know what I mean? Actually, this is a great shot for details. We finally see Morgana speaking in her normal cat form, encouraging the Phantom to keep it up. And look at all this equipment around him. Weights, a speed bag, and if you look at his feet, there's even a professional workout mat. This guy is really serious about being physically fit enough to do his job, which, I'm not gonna lie, makes me respect him a lot. He's a proactive RPG hero, training himself both on and off the battlefield. The question is if this actually affects your stats or not. Does it give you more experience, or some kind of literal buff the more you keep at it? I'm not sure, but this next shot definitely shows the Phantom getting stronger, because somehow he just made this Ganesh demon turn into a mask that he places directly over his last one. And these two words say it all. Persona Get. What kind of new system is this that allows you to just capture demons in the wild for your own use? I mean, it explains why you fight them, and I'm not going to complain for a second about the amount of enemy variety this would allow for, but I'm super curious how it works. Is this the Shin Megami Tensei route where you can converse with them and try to bring them to your side? Or are whole new systems at work here? I guess we'll just have to wait to find out. And that's pretty much it for the shot-by-shot rundown. There is another segment after they show the title again, but all of these clips are completely out of context, highly dramatized, and really don't give us much to work with. The only one that's usable is this shot of the conductor from the train. Well, now we know his ultimate fate at least, and why that train went out of control like it did. So, no analysis for this. Sorry guys, it's just really that uneventful. A lot is being said here, but the only thing it tells us about the game is that it's coming out summer next year. It's almost like gameplay matters or something. Now, what does this all mean when we try to look at the bigger picture and get a better understanding of the game as a whole? Well, get comfy if you haven't already, because using the information we've learned, I'm going to attempt to recreate all of these events as they'll play out in the final game. To begin, we know for a fact that the Phantom is a newcomer in Tokyo, which makes sense. This is a common element in modern Persona games. The main character always starts off their journey by moving to a place that's wholly unfamiliar to them, but during that initial transfer, they quickly bear witness to something odd. Something unexplainable, something so far beyond their realm of understanding that they have no frame of reference for it. Then it all goes back to normal, and for quite a while, I might add. Persona games are always a slow burn, sinking their hooks in early and slowly revealing their mysteries to you over time. And I think that's what happens to the Phantom, somewhat at least. Bear in mind, while trying to put these together, that every single shot with a date from the first trailer is set on April 11th. This was most likely a placeholder at the time, and wasn't fully representative of when it actually takes place in the third. Regardless, I do believe that these two shots take place at the beginning of the timeline. This is because of the absence of Morgana, and the Phantom's pretty vacant expression. He looks like he's a million miles away, and wouldn't you be too if your mind was still adjusting to being this far from home? He's brought out of this trance by the train going the other way. It speeds by quite quickly, rocking everybody in the Phantom's car, and this is because they're having a couple problems, namely the fact that their conductor has just become a mindless demon. His new life is short-lived, however, as he's quickly visited by the Phantom Thieves, or rather, the Phantom Thief, as there's only one in operation right now. This leads to the train crashing back at the other station, and this becomes the incident that everyone talks about on the news. But before the Phantom realizes that any of that happened, he's reached his destination, and steps into the main crosswalk of Tokyo. That's where he gets his first glimpse that something isn't quite right in this town. It's where the world freezes around him, and he comes face to face with what he will later know as Arsene. But his persona departs just as quickly as it appeared, leaving him confused and possibly even more terrified than he was already. But with the world back to normal, he has no choice but to move on. He eventually reaches the small cafe where his new guardian awaits. Introductions are made, he settles down in his new room and hunkers down for the night, giving him plenty of time to think about the day's events. The next morning, someone in the cafe is watching TV, and that's when news of the incident is revealed to the Phantom. It's a chilling story, especially considering that could have just as easily been his train that went crazy. But there's no time to dwell on it, because school starts soon and he can't be late for the first day. It's on the way there that he bumps into Ryuji and Anne, who are already familiar with one another. They accept him into their group, hang out a while, and Ryuji even takes it upon himself to show the new guy around. This ends up being more of a 3-hour tour though, as they take a bit of a wrong turn and end up at Palace. Notice how Morgana still hasn't encountered the party yet. Using multiple different angles, we can confirm that she is not poking her head out of the Phantom's bag like she usually is in any of these shots. So again, without other options, these two have no choice but to investigate. And considering this place is practically made of demons and warped desires, they're caught pretty quickly. We're not quite sure what happens to Ryuji, but the Phantom is dragged off to the dungeon of this old castle, guarded by hollow knights of mindless intent. This would be the end for any normal being, but as we've established, the Phantom is no normal being. Bound for hours, the Phantom falls unconscious. It's then that he has a dream of being locked in a prison manned by two twin guards and an enigmatic warden named Igor. Igor has one simple statement and one simple question for the Phantom. You are a slave. Want emancipation? The answer is pretty obviously yes, so to accomplish this end, the Phantom fully realizes one of his defining character traits, his split personality. I think he has this disorder for two reasons. One, it would explain why Igor needs two attendants this time around. It's one for each version of the Phantom. And I can't believe I didn't notice this before, but there's even symbolic evidence of this in their designs. Notice how they're each missing the opposite eye of the other. One even has their hair loose and free in a ponytail, while the other is tied up neat and proper in a bun. It's almost like they're two halves of the same whole, filling in what the other lacks. Two, because of the way his bio is worded on the English website. He seems quiet and well-mannered at first glance, but gives a completely different impression once he has donned his Phantom Thief guise. What is the motivation of his alter ego? This passage seems to refer to them as separate entities, with one handling the day-to-day doldrums of school, and the other jumping across rooftops to steal the hearts of the corrupt. It's also a neat way of explaining why he's capable of wielding multiple personas, because deep down, the Phantom himself is multiple people. In fact, you could say that Arsene himself is the alter ego. The Phantom's desire to break free of the oppressive society around him was so strong that it took on a life of its own, hence why it could show itself to him earlier. It's actually a very similar concept to DN Angel, which also featured an unassuming boy who had a thieving alternate personality. Unlike Dark Mousy, however, Arsene can set things on fire. These newfound powers break the Phantom from his bonds and decimate the guards around him. Now he has two goals: escape the old castle and find Ryuji. This is most likely when the dungeon footage from the first trailer happens, because A, it's still set in the old castle, and B, it's the only time that the Phantom would be alone. Looking at it that way, this whole segment probably serves as a tutorial, teaching you about combat, stealth, and your various options for moving around the environment. Shortly after, you find Ryuji, who still hasn't awakened to his own persona yet, but in the process of breaking him out, you run into even more trouble. This would be the end of the Phantom and Ryuji, if not for Morgana swooping in to save the day. This is where we get the scene of Ryuji exclaiming about how a cat can talk, which is an understandable reaction considering this is the first time he's met her. That said, we can't definitively say this scene takes place in the old castle dungeon because the visual cues in the environment aren't a perfect match. But aside from all the circumstantial evidence that it does, I think anyone could look at the old school lights, the cobblestone floor, and the rickety bridge they just crossed and think that it's certainly castle-like. And after all this chaos, they manage to escape and come back to the real world. And once they're back to safety, it's time for a team meeting to discuss everything that's happened. Morgana explains everything: what Palace is, where it comes from, and her mission to end the individuals responsible for it by stealing their corrupted hearts from them. It's a shady job for sure, and it's going to make them no shortage of enemies, but these individuals are untouchable otherwise, and left as is, the literal hell they've built around themselves will eventually collapse with dire consequences, just like the conductor of that train losing his mind in the real world. Not to mention they'll keep hurting people like this woman as long as they're left unchecked anyway. She also explains the Phantom's abilities to him in greater detail, and tries to comfort Ryuji through what he's seen. Understanding how dire the situation is though, the two agree to help, even if one of them isn't capable of crazy persona things yet, and that's how Morgana ends up in his bag. Now here's where things start to get less definitive. If this timeline is true, it means that this is where the Phantom and Morgana meet. It would make sense for it to happen early, considering how little footage there is of her not being carried in his bag, but we also have to consider that Ryuji doesn't have his persona yet, and Anne doesn't even know Palace exists at this point. Looking at the shot where she awakens Carmen, we see a portrait in the back of a rich, manly-looking man in a cape. Now, doesn't that remind you of something? Considering the nature of this demon, kidnapping Anne and chaining her to a wall would be consistent behavior for the character, and explain why she wears the expression she does in this shot. Either she's steeling herself for battle against someone who planned on doing terrible things to her, or she's ready to let loose a lot of pent-up pain on this guy after the battle is over. But the problem this placing creates is that we've got plenty of footage showing her with the rest of the team exploring the old castle again, which means even after rescuing her, we still have a reason to come back here. I have two explanations for this. One is that the castle is unfinished business. You only half explored it the first time around, and because you're not even close to the level of the enemies there, you decide to put it off for a while and tackle some easier targets. This would also explain the inclusion of the rat portion, because by the time you get back to that point, the status quo has been established, and you'd need something to help keep the dungeons fresh. The other is that Anne catches up to you as soon as you return from Palace, and after seeing Morgana in her true form, she understandably wants some answers. That would explain why she's at the cafe with everyone else in this shot, and would also contextualize this line where she offers to help the group. Either that or she says this after you rescue her and she awakens Carmen. After all, considering the situation she was in, I would not blame her in the slightest for wanting revenge. Either way, I think it's safe to assume that Ryuji gets his persona before Anne does, because not only was he exposed to Palace earlier than she was, but we also see him alongside her in the battle against Lust. The question is when this happens. Because of all the effects, it's very difficult to make out anything in the background of his first scene with Captain Kidd. The only detail I can see is what appears to be an intricate paper lantern hanging from the ceiling, but this particular lantern isn't featured in any other shot, so for now, I have no idea where this takes place. Possibly in an intermediate dungeon between the old castle and Lust's domain. Although, I can't say for certain that it's not the art gallery, the pyramid, or the space station, because Anne is present in all three of those areas. Again, because of the scarcity of team shots that don't have Anne in them, and that we knew about her since the first trailer, as opposed to Yusuke, who only had a brief visual clue to his existence, it's safe to assume that Anne will become a core member of the team fairly early. How early? Well, the shot with the closest date to April 11th, the supposed start of this adventure, that features her is placed only a week later. If the amount of events we're theorizing to happen can happen that quickly, this is turning out to be one of the absolute quickest Persona games to get you knee-deep in the action. Apparently somebody was listening to the complaints about Persona 4. We can also use dates to help determine the order in which you'll be visiting the dungeons, or at least some time frames for when they unlock. So if we're right so far, the timeline of this game goes as such. April 11th, intro and meeting Arsene. April 12th, meeting Ryuji, Anne, and Morgana. First encounter with the palace, first visit to the Velvet Room, and the awakening of Arsene. Sometime between April 13th and April 17th, both the stopgap dungeon for Ryuji and Lust's domain, during which time both Carmen and Captain Kidd are awakened. Sometime before April 18th, all base party members unlocked and now capable of returning to the old castle for further exploration. As I stated previously, this time frame might also be when you just unlock these two characters and they travel with you even without their personas yet. Late May, you can infiltrate the art gallery, aka Vanity's domain. Sometime between the art gallery and early October, Yusuke's dungeon. We know he's unlocked during this time because we see him in this shot with the rest of the guys getting chased by a boulder. Also, early October, the pyramid becomes available. And finally, late September, the space station, aka Greed's domain. The only other shot that I think is worth placing is this one where the Phantom is being interrogated. I don't have a date for it, but the thing is, because it's lacking the kaleidoscope border and because he's in his school uniform, we know that this takes place in the real world. This means that whoever is behind his imprisonment, they have the kind of authority that lets them do what they want in broad daylight. And there's one other observation about this scene. Instead of asking who his friends are, or finding out how to bring the rest of the Phantom Thieves to justice, she just wants to know how to steal a heart. This could imply that the demons aren't aware of how this process is performed, and now that they're aware of it, perhaps want to use it to achieve their own means. And that is it. That is absolutely everything I could find in the third Persona 5 trailer. This game is looking slicker and more intriguing every time we get new information on it. And I don't know about you, but it's incredibly telling when even after working for days on this video, I'm still not any more burned out on the idea of the game. And on that note, thank you all so much for watching this whole thing. This was a massive endeavor. It always is, but I love every second of it. And again, nothing makes me happier than knowing that so many people were looking forward to this. I really hope I delivered what you wanted. But if I didn't, bear in mind that analysis isn't all that I do. I do rant-style videos if you haven't had enough of my voice yet, like this one exploring what happened to mid-range priced games. I also do weekly countdowns as well, such as the top 8 fan games, which you can check out by clicking here. We even have a gameplay channel now, if that's your kind of thing. Last I checked, we're playing through both Freedom Planet and the Shovel Knight Challenge Mode missions, so if that sounds like your thing, give it a go. Also, I'd be remiss for mentioning this, but please also check out the guys at Game Explain. They're pretty much the individuals that inspired me to do these kinds of videos in the first place, and they are very professional about it, so definitely give them the credit they deserve. And if you like, please consider subscribing so you can catch everything I do, including more analyses, as soon as I do them. Until then, I'm Whatthefnu, and I'm gonna go sleep a lot. Just sleep a lot. Later, everybody.